On my 63rd birthday, I showed up with a homemade strawberry cake and a hopeful smile. I had dressed up in my nicest blouse, fixed my hair the way Daniel used to say made me look like a news anchor, and even packed candles just in case. No one had mentioned dessert, so I thought I'd bring something sweet and pretend everything was fine. It had been a while since my son or his wife returned my calls, but I still hoped today would feel special. When I got to the door, Emily barely looked at me before shouting something about napkins. The dining room was already full. I stood there holding my cake, scanning the room, and then I saw her Emily sitting in my seat. My seat, the one I always sat in for birthdays and holidays. Daniel was beside her, laughing at something on his phone. "Hey Mom," he said, without looking up, "just pull up a chair. There's space in the back." I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. Then Emily pointed toward a side room and said, "We set up a little table for the kids. It's got plastic cups and coloring books. Thought it'd be more fun, you know." I followed her hand and saw a flimsy fold-up table where toddlers were banging spoons on plates of boxed mac and cheese. I honestly thought it was a joke, but Daniel nodded. "It's easier this way. You can sit with Jason's twins." My heart sank. "The kids' table," I whispered. Emily laughed like it was nothing. "It's just logistics. There wasn't room." But I could see 2 empty chairs at the main table. One had a purse on it, the other a folded napkin. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't ask for my seat back. I walked over, placed the cake down, and sat on a too small plastic chair while the kids ignored me completely. No one said happy birthday. No one toasted me. Daniel clinked glasses with Emily from the other room and talked about their trip to Mexico. I ate cold mashed potatoes in silence. One toddler spilled juice on my shoe, and I cleaned it up quietly with a napkin. After dinner, I went to the kitchen to check on my cake. No one had touched it. The candles were still in the box. I put it back in the container, said goodbye to no one in particular, and left. The night outside was quiet. I didn't even turn on the radio as I drove home. The house felt cold, not just chilly, but the kind of cold that settles into your bones. I put the untouched cake in the fridge, took off my earrings, and walked into the small room where I kept my important papers. I opened the safe and pulled out my Wiltha one I wrote 10 years ago, back when Daniel used to call every Sunday and thanked me for being a good mom. Back when I believed he'd always be there for me. I laid it on the kitchen table and stared at it under the light. I thought of every meal I made for him, every dollar I saved to help him through school. Every night I stayed up comforting him through heartbreaks and stress. And now, I was nothing but an afterthought. A joke at a plastic table. That's when it hit MIT. Wasn't just a bad dinner. It wasn't an accident. It was the moment I knew he was out of the will. For good. I folded the old will, tucked it into an envelope, and wrote one word across the front. Void. That birthday wasn't the first sign, just the clearest one. Looking back, I can see it really started when Emily moved in. At first I thought she was just quiet. She didn't hug me the day we met, but I told myself some people just aren't huggers. She called me Mrs. Allen for 2 whole years, which felt strange, but I didn't say anything. I tried to make her feel at home. I cooked her favorite meals when she visited, offered to help with errands, even let her choose the new curtains for Daniel's old room when they turned it into a guest room. I wanted her to feel like part of the family, but slowly, things started to change. Little things. One day, the photo of Daniel and me on his college graduation day disappeared from the hallway. I found it weeks later, stuffed in a drawer, under old coupons. Our holiday traditions, things we'd done for years, started to vanish too. No more Parajas on Christmas Eve. No more movie marathons on Thanksgiving morning. "We're doing something different this year," Emily would say, while Daniel just stood behind her, nodding. I didn't argue. I'd still show up with a pie or a small gift, keeping quiet and trying not to cause trouble. Then one spring afternoon, I stopped by without calling, holding a basket of herbs from my garden. Emily opened the door, looked down at the basket and said, "Oh, we don't really do organic, but thanks." She didn't take it, just turned away and left me standing there. I went home, sat in my kitchen, and tried to convince myself it wasn't personal. Maybe she didn't like Boston, maybe she was just having a rough day. But then came the china incident. I had gifted Daniel and Emily my mother's old china set when they got married, delicate porcelain with tiny hand-painted roses. It had been passed down for 3 generations. One day, I asked Emily if I could borrow a teacup for a garden club tea party. She looked at me blankly. What china set? She asked. I described it and she shrugged. Oh, that. I thought you didn't want it. I donated it. That night, I looked online. There it was, on Facebook Marketplace, listed under her name, $50 for the whole set. I didn't say anything to Danielle. I told myself, it's just stuff, just porcelain, not worth a fight. But it stayed with me, because it wasn't just about the dishes, it was about everything she was slowly erasing. It was like she was rewriting our story, one where I barely existed. Every time I visited after that, more had changed. The kitchen no longer smelled like garlic and onions, it smelled like fake candles. The couch I helped them pick out was gone. Even Jason, my grandson, had stopped asking to sit on my lap. He clung to Emily, and when I reached for him, he hesitated. I still brought gifts. I still asked about his school. I even folded laundry without being asked. But every conversation with Emily felt like walking on glass. She'd make little comments like, "Are you still driving? Isn't it getting risky at your age?" Or, "Have you ever looked into retirement homes? Some of them are really nice now." Daniel never defended me. He'd just look down or walk out of the room. Once, I asked him if something was wrong between us. He said, "You're imagining things, Mom. Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. That's what he called it when I asked why I wasn't invited to their daughter's ballet recital. He said it was a scheduling mix-up, but I saw the pictures. Everyone else was there. I just wasn't meant to be. So, I stopped trying. I visited less. I still sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts. But I stopped popping in. No one noticed. No one asked why. The silence settled in, like dust in an empty room. It wasn't the big thing that broke my heart. It was all of it. Every ignored message, every erased photo, every time Emily rolled her eyes like I didn't belong. When I finally spoke, I told myself it was okay. I was still his mother. I was the reason Daniel had the life he did. I just had to keep the peace because that's what moms do, right? But deep down, something had already started to shift. A quiet kind of knowing. It wasn't just about losing my seat at the table. That night was about slowly being pushed out of the whole room. The moment that truly broke something inside me was when I found my mother's china set online, listed under Emily's name. No phone call, no explanation, just 10 blurry photos and a $50 price tag. The caption read, "Vintage junk, no returns." That was my family's history. That was how she saw it. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the listing, and tried to remember the last time I'd seen Daniel without Emily by his side. It had been over a year. Every visit, she hovered. Every phone call, she answered. And if he did pick up, he sounded rushed, distracted. His texts always came right after, "Sorry, was in the middle of something." The last time we had lunch, just the two of us, I brought up the idea of taking a road trip together. Just like old times. Maybe drive up to the mountains, eat at that old diner we both loved. Daniel smiled in that tight, polite way and said, "I don't think Emily would be into that." As if he needed her permission to spend time with his own mother. I didn't push. I smiled, changed the subject to Jason's school safer way. But after the China incident, I couldn't unsee it anymore. All the pieces of me that had quietly disappeared. The books I'd saved from his childhood gone. The quilt I made for their wedding. I never saw it again. The recipe binder I passed down, full of handwritten family meals. Daniel once laughed and said, "Emily prefers Pinterest." That stung. So one day, while Emily took Jason to swim class, I called Daniel. I asked if we could meet. He said yes. We sat in a noisy little coffee shop near his office. I can still smell the burnt espresso and hear the soft whirring of the fridge behind the counter. I told him I felt like I was being pushed out, that something had changed. I asked why Emily rolled her eyes every time I spoke, why I wasn't invited to dinners anymore, why it felt like I was disappearing from their lives. He took a sip of his latte and said, "Mom, you're reading into things too much. You've always been a little intense about family stuff." Intense. He said it like it was a flaw, like caring too much was something to be embarrassed about. I brought up the china. He frowned and said, "Emily told me you gave it to Goodwill." I told him the truth, that I saw it listed online. He just shrugged. "It's just stuff," he said. That's when it hit me. My son didn't see the difference anymore between keepsakes and clutter, between love and leftovers. I looked at him and asked one final question. Do you really think I'm imagining all of this? He didn't answer, just stared at his coffee, then glanced at his watch, and said he had a meeting soon. I stood up, nodded, and walked out, leaving my tea untouched on the table. That night, I pulled out the folder from my filing cabinet marked Estate. Inside were copies of my will, old insurance papers, and bank records. I ran my finger over the line that read, Beneficiary, Daniel Allen. 10 years ago, that felt right. Back when Daniel called me every Sunday. Back when I believed he'd carry my story forward. But now, it felt like handing a matchbook to someone standing next to dry wood. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and tapped on a name I hadn't used in years. Melissa, my niece, my sister's daughter. She answered on the second ring. Aunt Ruth, she said, surprised. I told her I was thinking about updating my will and wanted to ask her something. She didn't hesitate, not for a second. Of course, she said, whatever you need. No suspicion, no defensiveness, just warmth. The next morning, I called my lawyer. He still remembered me from a decade ago, when I first made the will, right after Daniel landed his first real job. Back then, I came into his office with a binder full of dreams. I left everything to Daniel: my house, my savings, even the antique piano that belonged to my grandmother. It made sense at the time. He was my only child, my heart, the person I thought would keep my memory alive. But sitting in that office again, looking at the old will laid out beside the new one, something inside me felt calm for the first time in years. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't bitterness. It was survival. It was me choosing to protect the life I had built from people who no longer saw me as someone worth keeping. I signed the papers, then I looked at the new documents, fresh and final, and whispered to no one in particular, this is how you protect yourself when the people you raised forget how to love you. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt clear, like a window had been wiped clean. I looked at the lawyer and said I wanted Melissa to have everything: my house, my savings, all of it. He paused, kindly, and asked, are you sure you don't want to leave anything to your son? I looked him in the eye and said, I already gave him everything that mattered. He didn't keep it. He never asked again. The rest happened fast. Melissa's name was added, Daniel's was removed. I signed where I needed to, initialed every page, and walked out with a new folder in my bag and something heavy lifted off my chest. I didn't tell anyone. Not Melissa. Not my friends. Not even my neighbor who always lingers by the mailbox, hoping for a bit of gossip. I didn't want questions. I just needed space, room to let the decision sit inside me before anyone else could touch it. In the days that followed, I started pulling away from anything that reminded me of Daniel's life. I stopped checking Emily's social media. I deleted the shortcut to Jason's school blog. I moved a folder of photos, birthday parties, school plays, old family dinners off my desktop and into an old hard drive. I didn't delete them. I just locked them away. A small part of me still hurt, still hoped, but the rest of me needed to breathe. I cleaned the house like I was preparing for company. I scrubbed every baseboard, rearranged my pantry, dusted places I hadn't touched in years. I needed to move, to feel useful. But no matter how many shelves I wiped down, I couldn't stop the ache that kept returning, especially when I pictured Daniel's face in that coffee shop. The way he looked at me like I was a stranger, like I barely mattered. 2 weeks after I changed the will, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His tone was cheerful, like nothing had happened. Hey Mom, hope you're doing okay. Emily and I were wondering, any chance you could help with the kids next month? We're planning a cruise, just 7 days. You'd have the whole house to yourself. Plenty of snacks. Jason's pretty independent now. I stared at the phone. 7 days. He wanted me to play grandmonkel while he and Emily drank cocktails on a boat and ignored me the rest of the year. I waited for a please. It never came. Why me? I asked. He laughed like it was obvious. You're still grandma, right? You're the only one they're comfortable with. I said one word. No. He was quiet for a second. Then I heard him sigh, like I was being difficult. Okay, well, we'll figure something out. And that was it. No, are you okay? No, I miss you. No, why do you sound so cold? He just hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the spot on the fridge where Jason's crayon drawings used to hang before I took them down last year. Emily had called them clutter. That call wasn't a test. It was confirmation. He didn't care. He didn't notice. He didn't love me, not the way I had spent my whole life loving him. So I went to my room, packed a small suitcase, and booked a room at a quiet little motel about an hour out of town. I didn't leave a note, I didn't send a text, I just left. I needed to disappear for a while. Let the silence speak louder than I ever could. I needed space, not just from Daniel and Emily, but from the version of myself who had accepted being treated like a chore, just to stay in their lives. The motel was old-fashioned, real keys, faded floral blankets. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions. I told her I might stay a few nights, maybe a week. She nodded and slid me a takeout menu. I didn't unpack much, just a few changes of clothes, a paperback I never opened, and one photo from my wallet. Daniel, age 8, on the beach with jelly on his chin, holding his arms up like he'd just conquered the world with a half-built sandcastle. I propped it up against the lamp beside the bed and lay down, staring at the ceiling. There were no phones ringing, no dishes clinking, no one asking for anything. It was the first time in years I could hear nothing but peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't on call for someone else's convenience. I didn't cry, but I didn't feel free either. I just felt still, like everything inside me had finally stopped spinning. That night, I microwaved a frozen pasta dinner and sat by the window watching the motel's neon vacancy sign flicker. Somewhere between bites, a thought hit me that made my stomach twist. If I had said yes to Daniel's cruise request, I would have been right back in that house, sleeping in the guest room that used to be mine, taking care of Jason, while Emily posted poolside selfies. I would have cleaned their kitchen, folded their laundry, and left without a thank you. They didn't want me there because they missed me. They wanted me there because I was useful, quiet, reliable, free help. That thought stayed with me, bitter, like old coffee. The next morning, I took my coffee to a park bench with a notepad and started writing. Not a letter, just a list. I called it a memory exercise, not something petty. I started big, working extra shifts to pay for Daniel's braces, skipping vacations so he could go to college, selling my jewelry to help with his wedding. Then came the little things: ironing his shirts for job interviews, sewing his Halloween costumes, staying up late to bake his favorite lemon squares before exams. The page filled quickly. I turned it over and kept writing. Then I made another column: things Daniel had done for me. That one was short. A few birthday cards, dinner once, 3 years ago, a scarf I never wore because Emily made a face when I opened it. I didn't make that list to hurt myself. I made it to finally see things as they really were, to stop pretending I had been holding up the relationship by myself the whole time. When I got back to the motel, I called Melissa. She picked up with a cheerful "Hi, Aunt Ruth." I didn't explain everything. I just told her I might come visit soon. She sounded genuinely happy. "You're the one who should be asking if I need anything," she laughed. Her voice was a kind of comfort I hadn't realized I'd missed. I hung up, feeling just a little lighter. Later that night, Daniel sent a text. Number, punctuation, no warmth, everything okay. I didn't answer. An hour later, he called. I let it ring. Then the voicemail pinged. "Hey Mom, just wondering where you are. Emily said you didn't answer earlier. We're going to need to know if you're still free next weekend. Let us know soon, okay?" That was it. No, are you okay? No, I miss you. Just another request, another favor. I deleted the message. Then I blocked his number. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. Not the slam the door kind of done, just quietly done. The kind of done where the door's already closed and no one's left standing on the other side. I turned off the lamp, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling again, but this time, I wasn't waiting for a call. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I let the silence stretch. I let it settle in my bones. And for the first time in a long, long while, I fell asleep without checking my phone. The first time they moved me out of my own bedroom, they called it temporary. Jason had just started kindergarten, and Emily said she needed the room for the nanny. I wasn't even upset. I offered. I said I'd take the smaller room at the end of the hall. I truly believed I was helping. But then that small room became Emily's craft space. Then it became her home office. Eventually, it turned into a walk-in closet. I remember walking in one day, just looking for a spare blanket and finding the bed gone. In its place were shelves full of shoes and purses. Daniel stood behind me with his hands in his pockets, avoiding my eyes. I didn't say anything. I just turned around and went to the garage. That's where they told me I could stay. For now, they said. We'll insulate it. Emily promised. We'll add a heater and a rug. It'll be cozy like a studio apartment. I nodded, but my voice was caught somewhere between shame and disbelief. That winter was cold. I slept beside moving boxes and a rack of tools, wrapped in 2 blankets and an old sweater. There were mice in the walls. I heard them scratching at night. I told Daniel once. He said he'd look into it. Nothing ever changed. The next summer, they threw a barbecue. I offered to help. Emily smiled and said, "Maybe just stay inside. We don't want you getting overheated out here." Inside meant the garage. I spent the afternoon folding towels, listening to the sound of laughter through the wall. At one point, I peeked through the small window and saw them all gathered around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows. Daniel had Jason on his lap. They were smiling, laughing. I used to be part of those nights. Now I was folding linens beside a lawnmower when I brought it up gently. Daniel sighed. "Mom, Emily's under a lot of stress. Can't you just not make things harder?" That line stuck with me. Not make things harder. Like just being there, being me, was somehow a burden. Over time, I stopped asking for space inside the house. I kept my things in storage bins. I used the fridge in the garage, even when the one in the kitchen was empty. I washed my dishes in the laundry sink. It was easier that way, less eye-rolling, less pretending, less pain. I started calling the garage my place as a joke. "Back to my place," I'd say after dinner with a fake little laugh. No one ever laughed with me. Eventually, Emily suggested I get a mini fridge, so you won't have to come in so much. I nodded, bought one, then a kettle, then a space heater. Piece by piece, I built a little life in that cold, concrete box that smelled like old motor, oil, and damp cardboard, and Daniel let it happen. He never said, "This is too much." Never stepped in. He just stood there while his wife quietly took over every part of the house that used to belong to both of us. I told myself it was just a phase. They were young, things would settle down, Jason would grow up, and we'd all find our way back to something better. But 5 years passed. Jason traded crayons for video games. Emily's closet took over 2 rooms, and Daniel stopped knocking when he came into the garage. He just barged in, like I was part of the walls, part of the house, not part of the family. One day, a neighbor I barely knew stopped me on the sidewalk. "Oh, you're Emily's mother, right? The one who lives out back." Out back, not Ruth, not Daniel's mom, just some vague extra. I smiled and said, "No, I'm just the tenant." I even said it with a chuckle. Garage apartment. Then I went home, but I didn't go inside. I walked straight into the garage, sat on my folding chair next to the little kettle, and stared at the cement floor. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't temporary. It was never temporary. It was erasure wrapped in guilt and silence and low expectations. It was me disappearing, little by little, so they could feel more comfortable. I looked around at the plastic drawers, the dim lamp, the boxes no one ever unpacked. I saw it clearly. They didn't see me as family anymore. I was storage. One morning, I was sweeping the garage floor, trying to make the place feel more like a room and less like what it really was, when Daniel knocked on the side door. He didn't come in, just stood there, hands stuffed in his coat pockets, like he was rehearsing something. "Hey Mom," he said. "Got a minute?" I stepped aside. He glanced around like he was seeing the space for the first time. "Emily and I were talking, and we had an idea. Just wanted to run it by you." I waited. He scratched the back of his neck, something he always did before saying something he knew I wouldn't like. "So the house yours? I mean, it's just sitting empty, right? I mean, we know you love it, but you're barely using it." Emily thinks it might be time to consider something more manageable, like an apartment, closer to us, less space to deal with. "You mean downsizing?" I said, keeping my voice flat. He smiled like I'd solved a puzzle. "Exactly, downsizing. The market's great, you could get a good price. And if you don't want to live alone, remember that senior community Emily's mom toured? Really nice, clean, quiet. They've got a little gardening club." I stared at him. "And what would happen to the house?" He hesitated, just a bit. "Well, we could help take care of it. Keep it in the family, maybe move in. Jason's getting bigger. More space would be good. And you'd be nearby for holidays, help with the kids and all that." I nodded, like I was thinking about it. But inside, something cold settled behind my ribs. He wasn't offering help. He was offering a trade. My independence for their convenience. My memories for their comfort. My home for their future. I thought of every floor I'd scrubbed, every grocery list I'd stretched down to the last coin. The dinners I skipped so Daniel could have what he needed growing up. The promises, the erasures, the quiet acceptance. I thought about the garage, and I smiled. Let me think about it, I said. That's all I'm asking, he replied, relieved. That night, I didn't sleep in the garage. I packed a small bag and drove to my real home, the house they wanted, the house I bought, brick by brick, over 30 years cleaning hotel rooms, folding strangers' laundry, making ends meet when there was barely enough to make. I walked through those quiet rooms, touched the walls, opened drawers, ran my hand across the piano bench where Daniel once sat as a 14-year-old, pounding the keys with sticky hands and a smile bigger than his whole body. Dust had settled, but the bones of the house were still strong, just like me. I stayed up past midnight, sitting at the kitchen table with the will spread out in front of me. I read every page carefully, one last time. In the morning, I called my lawyer and made it final. No more changes. I sealed 3 copies, one for my records, one for Melissa, and one for the bank's safe deposit box. I wrote on each envelope in bold black ink, no changes without written permission, irrevocable unless I say so. After that, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. I bought fresh sheets, stocked the fridge, and went to the nursery to buy a small lavender plant for the kitchen window, just like I used to have. I wanted the house to feel like mine again, and for the first time in a long while, it did. It didn't feel like a storage space or a stopgap. It felt like a home where a woman lived, a woman with a name, a story, and the right to be treated with dignity. 3 days later, Daniel texted me to follow up on our downsizing talk. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My silence was the answer, and my will. That was the protection I should have put in place years ago. It happened during a community dance class, just a slow waltz, nothing fancy. One moment I was swaying. The next, my knees gave out and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. A nurse was adjusting my fore and smiling kindly. She told me I'd fainted, low blood sugar or stress, but nothing serious. I was going to be fine. Just rest, she said. So I did, but the news spread faster than the truth. By the time I was moved to a private room that evening, I could hear whispers in the hallway. Then the door opened. Daniel walked in first. Emily followed, and behind them, a man in a suit holding a briefcase, a lawyer. Their lawyer. They didn't look relieved. They looked surprised. Caught? You're awake, Emily said, like she couldn't believe it. You're okay, Daniel added, forcing a laugh. They said you were unconscious. We were worried. No flowers, no hugs. Daniel didn't even sit down. He kept glancing at the lawyer, waiting for a signal. I looked at the man in the suit, then back at Daniel. You thought I died? I asked, my voice low but steady. Emily gave a tight little laugh. Of course not. We just wanted to make sure your affairs were in order, just in case. The lawyer stepped forward like he was about to speak, but I raised a hand. You can leave, I said. This isn't your case anymore. Daniel blinked. What are you talking about? My will, I said. My estate. It was changed months ago. Emily stepped closer, her voice rising. You didn't tell us. Didn't think you'd care, I replied. Didn't think you'd be interested. The lawyer hesitated, then quietly stepped back into the hallway. Emily looked furious. Daniel's face was pale. Mom, what's going on? He asked. I took a sip of apple juice. You tried to take over before you even knew if I was alive. That's what's going on. His voice tightened. That's not fair. I met his eyes. Neither was the garage. Neither was the kids' table. Neither was asking me to sell my house so you'd have more room for her handbags. Emily's voice turned sharp. You're twisting everything. No, I said. I'm finally seeing it straight. Daniel looked down. So, that's it. You're cutting us off. I shook my head. I already did. He stepped forward. Mom, come on. We can fix this. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who had once been my little boy, now a stranger. I thought we could, I said. But while you were planning a cruise, I was sleeping beside a lawnmower. While you were making room for handbags, you asked me to give up the only place I had left. Emily crossed her arms. You're being dramatic. I turned to her, and this time, I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel small. I felt done. You never wanted me in your lives. You wanted me on the sidelines, quiet, useful, and easy to ignore. I played along, thinking that was love. But it wasn't. And now, it never will be. Daniel sat down slowly, the truth sinking in. So, that's it, he whispered. Just like that. Just like that, I said. Emily stormed out. Daniel followed. The room was quiet again. I glanced at the clock. Visiting hours were almost over. I buzzed for the nurse and asked for a new blanket. I was cold, but not shaking. I was alone, but not abandoned. I pulled the covers up to my chest, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. As for Emily, I let her fade. No bitterness, no revenge, just absence. A space she carved out herself, step by step, word by word, choice by choice. I no longer rehearsed comebacks in the shower. I no longer rewrote moments in my mind, trying to soften them, trying to understand her. There was nothing left to understand. She was a chapter I no longer needed to reread. Some people leave quietly, others are removed for peace. I didn't tell Melissa much. She never pried. She simply showed up with soup when I was tired, fixed my Wi-Fi when it glitched, brought over books and stories and soft laughter. Sometimes, on cool evenings, we sat on the porch without saying anything at all, just two women with their hands wrapped around warm mugs, breathing in the kind of silence that heals, not hurts. And when I thought of Daniel, because I still did, sometimes I didn't ache the way I used to. The grief had shifted, become quieter, less sharp. He had made his choice, and I had finally made mine. I wasn't angry. I was whole. And in the quiet corners of my house, in the lavender by the window, in the piano's quiet hum and the herb garden weed planted out back, there was a softness again, a life rebuilt not from scraps, but from soul. I was no longer waiting to be remembered. I had remembered myself. I never saw her again, not face to face. But Melissa told me she'd been upset for weeks, angry about the will, saying I owed them, furious she'd tried so hard and still ended up with nothing. But I didn't feel anything anymore. I had no fight left for people who thought love came with a price tag and respect was something optional. I'd spent years saying sorry for needing help, for growing older, for taking up space. Years trying to keep peace by staying quiet when all I wanted was to be heard. Not anymore. Now, I said what I meant. I made choices that felt right. I cooked for myself. I rested when I was tired. And I stopped waiting for invitations that were never going to come. On my next birthday, Melissa showed up with a tiny cake, purple frosting, little sprigs of lavender on top. Your color, she said, lighting a single candle. I laughed. One's enough, I told her, not trying to set the house on fire. We ate in the kitchen, just the two of us. Our chairs creaked. Our stomachs were full. Before she left, she gave me a long hug and whispered, "Thank you for being brave." After she was gone, I stood by the door and watched the wind move through the herb garden, and I thought about all those years I spent giving and giving to people who only remembered me when they needed something. Then I looked around at this new life, quiet, small, but honest, no pretending, no walking on eggshells, just me, my name, my voice, and a chair that finally belonged to me again. He took my seat once, but I never let him take my peace.